today, but we're going to talk about marketing budgets. And the reason I thought that might be a great topic for today is that I spent some time after work today talking to the pediatric dentist who's next door to me, and we actually share the space that our second office is located in. We're never there at the same time, and her practice is right next door. Anyway, long story short, she's bringing on some new associates and really wanted to talk a little bit about strategy, like how could she best start to grow the practice, because it was easy to support just one doctor herself. But now that she has two associates coming on, she really needs new patient flow to increase in the practice so that she can keep them busy and happy as well. And so we went into some details. I did a little bit of a competition analysis for her, and I know I've offered that to you guys before. Totally happy to do that for anybody who wants it. But I had done a little competition analysis, and then we were talking about all the things you need to consider when you're trying to formulate a good marketing strategy to increase new patient flow, because some of the things that you'll do are great in the short term. So if you just want to get like more butts in the door quickly, and some things need to be there over the long term, like sustained effort over time, if you want to make sure that you always have a steady new patient flow coming into the practice. And one of the questions that I asked her to find out for me, or to figure out so we could start making some decisions, was how much was she willing to pay to acquire a new patient? And the reason this question is important is if you listen or follow any of the gurus online, and there's many of them, and many of them are amazing, they'll talk about percentage of revenues for determining your marketing budget. So they'll say, if you're trying to grow quickly, maybe you want to spend 6 or 8 or 10% of your revenues on marketing. If you're just trying to maintain a steady state, maybe it's 4 or 5%, yada yada. And some of those numbers I think make a ton of sense, but it really depends highly on the competitive nature of the market that you're in, what your local competition is already doing. So if you know what the practices who are doing better than you are doing, the budget that you might need to beat them might be big or small depending on what they're doing, because your only competition really is local. And that's where there's a few numbers that you should gather, information you should have when you're trying to make decisions about how much money to spend towards marketing. Because it should be an on-purpose amount. There should be planning involved. There should be a budget involved. But that budget will be different practice to practice, depending on your local competition and then what you are trying to accomplish. So what is your exact goal? And one of the important numbers that I think you need to know is how much you are willing to spend to acquire a new patient in the practice. And in order to make that determination, to know how much money you're willing to spend to acquire a new patient, you really need to know what the lifetime value of a patient actually is. Which means if you haven't been collecting this information so far, you might have to go back historically and look. You need to see if a patient, on average, joins your practice, and in the first year that they're within the practice, you make $1,000 off of them. I'm just tossing any random number out there. Then you might say, well, if on average our patients stay longer than a year, but I know in that first year I make on average $1,000 per patient, then I'd be very willing to spend $100 to get that patient in the door. Maybe. Depends on what your overhead is. Depends on lots of things. You could pick the number. But you would know what you would be willing to pay in order to get that person to become a patient of the practice. Let's say you make more per patient or less per patient, or on average your patients stay for way longer than 1 year with you. Then you can do some math to figure out what the lifetime value of a patient is to you, and then determine how much you'd be willing to spend to get that person to actually become a patient. It is really difficult, in my opinion, to come up with a really good marketing strategy and budget if you don't know those numbers, because otherwise it's a little bit like you're making it up. And you may be making it up based on that percentage number and your revenues, but if you don't know what you're willing to spend, and then if you're not tracking really well what you are spending and what you are doing to see what your return on investment for that is, then that's the reason a lot of people say that with marketing, they don't know if it's working, and they don't know what's working, and they're not sure if it's playing out the way that it was supposed to play out, whether they're doing it themselves or they're paying an agency or someone else to do it for them. So that's one really important piece of information that I think you need to have and think about and plan before you actually decide what your budget is. Because let's say right now you're bringing in 30 new patients a month and you want it to be 50. Well, if you know you need 20 more new patients a month than you are already getting based on your current efforts, and you know you're willing to spend $100 a patient to get them into the practice, then you can start to figure out your marketing budget from that. Not suggesting that everything you do equals a patient, but if you're going to spend $2,000 a month on Google Ads and you know that on average that brings you in 10 new patients a month, then if you're willing to spend $200 and you spend that's $2,000, that works out, right? The math on that works out okay to you, and it's like, okay, well then maybe this initiative is worthwhile continuing. But if it turns out with your marketing efforts that you're spending way more than you're willing to spend, or you're spending way less than you're willing to spend, but maybe you're not getting as many as you want, you can up the budget. So when you have these numbers, you can actually make good decisions because you can set like an initial goal and you can figure out an initial budget, and then you can see how those campaigns are working and determine if you need to change it based on that. So it's something really important to consider. The last thing I'll mention in today's video, because I'm keeping it short because I'm exhausted and I really need to get some sleep tonight, is when you're thinking about marketing strategy, it is important that you think about long-term strategy. So you can think about the ways to get people in the door immediately. And when I think of that, I often think about paid strategies, because when you're doing paid Google ads or paid Facebook or Instagram ads, you're trying to make people aware of you highly in the moment so that they take action. You're looking for those ready to buy people, the people who are like ready to buy what you're selling right then and there. A long-term strategy, be that social media or SEO or something else, might be something where you're trying to establish yourself as an expert in your space, meaning you want people to come to you and find you when they're looking for information, and maybe they're not quite ready to buy yet, but once they've learned from you a few times, they will then see you as the expert, and when they actually need something, you're the go-to. And it's important to have both strategies. I think it's really important that you have a robust long-term strategy, something that's almost like burning underneath, that's running consistently and constantly over time. And then you have the triggers you can pull in short-term strategy when you really need to turn up the patient flow. So I call that just turning on the new patient faucet. If you have steady efforts happening that don't have to be at a crazy high budget, but something that you're doing over time to build your authority and expert status in your space, that will serve you very well when you decide to turn on the faucet, like paid ads as an example, when you really need to increase patient flow in the short term or whatever it is that you're looking to accomplish in the practice. So if you don't have those numbers that I talked about, go find them so that you know what they are, and you can start to analyze your marketing efforts a little more closely to see if they're aligned with what you're willing to spend based on what you make off of people that come into the practice. To me, it just seems like a super logical way to think about your marketing. And then I will see you guys back here next week. I have no idea what we're going to be talking about. Like always, if you have a topic you would like me to cover, by all means, shoot me a message or comment on this video, and I will talk about anything that you like that I know something about that comes to running your practice, running your team, or running your life.